Compare these two chord progressions, version A and version B. Version B is an example of what we might call broken chords. Let me show you how to go from version A to version B in 7 simple steps. And if you'd like to follow along with the sheet music, you can download that for free at the link. Let's start with a very basic example of a broken chord pattern. We can use root position C major to do this. And I'm simply creating some rhythm by playing each of the notes in the chord individually. So that's where the idea of a broken chord comes from. We're breaking up the chord into individual notes, and that lets us create a beautiful rhythm pattern. Maybe the simplest broken chord pattern you can do with a 3-note chord like this is just to go from the bottom to the top and back down. 1, 2, 3, 4. So start with that. Just repeat that pattern. You notice that I'm using a bit of arm and wrist rotation here to help make this easier. And if we want, we can count this as 16th notes. So if I put the beat on that bottom note, 1, 2, 3, 4, I can then fill in with the 16th note subdivision. 1E and 2E and 3E and 4E and. Now to make a fuller piano arrangement, for our second step, we can add in whole notes in the left hand. So the left hand's going to hold out a bass note for quite a while the right hand repeats this pattern. 1E and 2E and 3E and 4E and then there's our next left hand bass note. Just get familiar with that coordination. Your left hand is going to be landing together with a note in your right hand, but it's playing much less frequently than your right hand. So there's a coordination challenge. This kind of pattern often sounds great with the sustain pedal. So you can connect the coordination of your sustain pedal to your left hand, because if your left hand is playing bass and just changing every measure when the chord changes, that's also when you want the pedal to change. It often works really well to leave the pedal down for the entirety of the sound of one chord. So tie those together right now, even though we're just on the C major chord. Change. Change. So when I say change, I'm lifting the sustain pedal briefly for the start of the new left-hand note and then immediately putting it back down. All right, that's been a lot of C major. Let's add in the other chord now, this F minor chord. And I'm also going to use inversions in my right hand. You're probably familiar with the concept of inversions. It means that I'm changing the octave in which one of the notes in the chord occurs. So here I'm using C, E, and G. Let's just move the C up an octave. I get a new inversion. So let's go between that and our root position F minor chord. As chord playing musicians, we want to work towards being able to choose any inversion of a 3-note chord in our right hand on the fly. And a good way to practice that is to just move through the same chord progression, but push yourself to choose different inversions for the chords. Here, you might use this basic pattern and sequence through these two chords, simply moving between different inversions. In a way, this is a form of improvisation, but it's the kind of limited improvisation within the structure of a song that a lot of musicians will do in pop music. And if you're interested in learning that particular kind of improvisation, you should become a member at pianofluency.com. Now we're ready for our next step, which introduces a different kind of broken chord pattern. instead of going from the bottom to the top and back down, I'm going to alternate notes with the thumb. So top note, thumb, middle note, thumb. And if we speed that up, it sounds like this. This pattern uses the same rhythm as that first pattern that we played. We're just putting the notes in a different order. And in fact, you could experiment with all sorts of different reorderings of these same notes, right? You could start on the bottom, go to the middle, bottom to the top, for example. Or you could start at the top, go to the bottom, and back up. There are lots of different combinations of these same 4 notes. And if you're playing one after another like this, you still end up with this continuous 16th note subdivision. This is a great way to think about broken chords. We're creating a rhythm that we want and a shape that we want, all within the same chord shape we're familiar with. So now I'm going to move between this C major shape and these 2 F minor shapes using our new pattern. And we're going to be pretty close to the final version. Now, especially at that tempo, that starts to be a little bit more challenging technically. If you're having any problem playing that at the tempo that I played, one thing to experiment with is which fingers you're using. A lot of times that's the difference between a passage being easy to play or impossible to play. Are you using the easiest set of fingers to use on each of the notes? So you can observe which fingers I'm using as I move from one chord to the next. I'm not always using 1, 3, and 5. Sometimes I'm using 1, 2, and 4. And you can experiment. Fingering can be a little bit individual for different players. So look for a fingering that makes that feel easy to you. Now let's add a little bit of melody in the right hand. For the first time, we're going to break away from only using notes in the chord shapes. I'm now going to be using other notes from the first part of the C major scale, and it sounds like this. You notice I'm creating that melody with the top note in the pattern. So there are places where it sounds like the melody is lasting for a longer time. It sounds like a longer note. We hear there this melody that sounds like bum, 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 bum. Our ear is drawn to the top note. So even though if we wrote it down on paper, those notes only last 1/16th note, it sounds like a quarter note melody because I'm bringing out that top note in my right hand. So that's a good place to start if you want to improvise and try creating your own melodies on top of a chord pattern like this. Just move around the top note on the top part of the pattern to different notes that might not belong in the chord but do belong in the scale. And that'll create a melody that sounds like it's played in quarter notes on top of the pattern. You also notice that there are spots where I had a quicker moving melody, a 16th note melody. Like there, for example. When that happened, I just abandoned the lower part of the pattern. I assumed that our ear is really familiar now with the sound of that F minor chord that melody happens against. And I can just let go of it for a moment so that I can continue that 16th note rhythm, but it's only going to happen in the melody now. Melody, and then back to chord. Those are 2 approaches you can experiment with, adding in a little bit of melody to the top part of your right hand when you're playing broken chords. Now, for our last step, we are going to change one of the bass notes. You might call this a reharmonization. And honestly, this is something I started doing at this point in our sequence of 10 grooves, just because my ear was getting a little bit sick of hearing the same 2 chords over and over again. The basic structure of the harmony is the same, and we're not going to change anything in our right hand. But the left hand is just going to play a different bass note. And this is one of the easiest ways to reharmonize a chord progression, right? To move through the same general function and sound of chords in a progression, but to give them a bit of a different sound. You're just going to change the bass note and leave all the chord tones where they are. Here, I'm simply moving my left hand to D instead of to F over the F minor chord. And if we add up all those notes and put them in the same octave, we get these 4 notes. Now, a fun little theory quiz for some of the more advanced students is to identify that chord quality. So pause the video here, identify the chord if you can. And the answer is D half diminished. Another name for this chord is D minor 7 flat 5. Okay. Now, when you're trying this kind of reharmonization where you just change the bass note, you don't necessarily need to know what the chord label would be for the new set of notes you're using. And sometimes it might not even be a chord that has a convenient formal name. That doesn't always matter, right? Theory is meant to be descriptive, not prescriptive. So if you're trying this kind of bass note reharmonization, just experiment and see what sounds good. I like this sound a lot, this sound of this half diminished 7 chord. And it didn't require me to do anything in my right hand. I just changed that bass note to D. So here's how the whole pattern now sounds with that one added bass note. And that's it for our broken chord pattern based on these 2 simple chords. As I mentioned, this is part of a 10-part series I'm doing on using these same 2 chords to create lots of different grooves. So I'll leave the playlist for that here. You can just watch through the whole series if you're enjoying yourself. I want to thank you for joining me. My name is Ted with Piano Fluency.